Well, it turns out that this family practice movement was really going on all over the country. Now, there actually were GP residencies prior to the modern family practice residencies. There were 199 GP residencies in the U.S. in 1966. They were scattered. There were a lot in California, the county hospitals in California. Wesley had a GP residency, probably St. Francis too, as I guess we don't say St. Francis anymore, but Via Christi. But these were undersubscribed. There were, I think, about 900 residents in 199 programs, so that was not a factor. But the new programs began to spring up on the base, and that's what we did in Wichita, was we used the accreditation for the GP residency to carry the transition to the new 3-year program until it was officially approved as a specialty in February of 1969. So there's a little fancy footwork to keep that going, you know. The first class of residents kind of came on the bet that it was going to be approved. So the deal I made with Wesley is that I would organize an ER Corp if Wesley would put $200,000 into a new family practice training program. So that was the trade. So I went to Wesley for $25,000 in salary and permission to earn something from my practice. We moved into a house, moved about 1,000 patients from, I was practiced on the west side, West 13th Street. And we started seeing patients and recruiting residents. But that was going on all over the country, really. Perhaps there were 500 people doing the same sort of thing that I was doing in the, as Orlo Guthrie says in Alice's Restaurant, it became a movement. And you are beneficiaries of some of that movement. First of all, there were 22 new medical schools formed in the 1970s. We doubled the entering class of medical students from 8,000 to 16,000. The number of residents in all disciplines went from, well, first about 50,000 to 75, and then to about 100,000. The number of doctors increased in the decade after the beginning of the family practice program from about 380,000 to over 700, 750, something like that now. So, you know, the odds of getting into medical school suddenly became better. From, let's say from 1910 until 1950, there were only about 85 medical schools in the U.S. with 8,000 total entering freshmen. So that was one benefit. The doctor shortage was supposedly alleviated, although it turns out that all the graduates of those new medical schools didn't turn out going where they should have gone or entering the specialty they should have entered. However, the success of the family practice programs was phenomenal and unprecedented in the history of American medicine. We went to being the third largest graduate medical education enterprise within medicine, exceeded by internal medicine and barely by surgery. And I think that is still the case, that family practice, in terms of the number of trainees, is the third largest discipline, specialty, in the U.S. So, you know, we went from 0 to 350 programs within a decade. And that has never been exceeded. Pediatrics started in 1935, and they went to about 150 residencies at the end of their first decade. So internal medicine is the 800-pound gorilla, but we're probably a 200-pound gorilla. And then it's surgery, and pediatrics. And I started to say OBGYN is next, but I suspect it may be something like anesthesiology or radiology or dermatology. So, from an academic standpoint, family practice has been a great success, an unprecedented success. And it was built on the notion that if we improved ourselves, you know, better training, certification, expanded the programs, that we would naturally achieve the numerical success that was needed to resolve the problems of maldistribution and fragmentation of care, the high cost of services. We were going to do all those things. And I believed that. I was a firm believer that, you know, that family, I don't think that necessarily that these 3 reports that I described had us in mind. But when we understood, I'm speaking of we general practitioners understood what was being called for, we raised our hands and said, hey, this is what we do. You know, we take care of practices in communities. We're not the cause of fragmentation of care. We're not the cause of the high cost of medicine. You know, we're a solution to these problems. And so that was what we had to sell. On the negative side, we faced some opposition about being legitimate. And I spent a good deal of my first decade in going around the country preaching the gospel of legitimacy of family practice, that we had a role that was definite. It was, you know, we agonized over the definition of the specialty. And we had to explain it not only to ourselves, but to other organizations, other specialty organizations were not necessarily supportive. The internists were not supportive, generally speaking, although individual internists in Wichita were quite helpful to me in getting. But by and large, internal medicine thought they were anti-intellectual and not really scholars. We didn't do research. And the AAMC was not so much in favor. And there were a lot of medical schools that didn't want to have departments or programs of family medicine. So that grew slowly. And I think there are some issues of legitimacy that linger on. I wrote an article called The Intellectual Basis of Family Practice that had a wide distribution that I think spoke to many of my colleagues at the time, although you can't write anything that's still good after 35 years. So I don't necessarily recommend it at this point.